first talk is on testing with Minitest by Victor Goff. Victor is very experienced programmer and mentor. He has been working in tech sector for about 25 years, and he has been teaching Ruby for 9 years already. So we look forward to hearing from him. So Victor, uh, take
Hi,
it away.
hopefully, hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Um, Cigar says, let me see if I can turn my microphone a little bit. I don't have a headset, so I'm using a condenser mic. Hopefully that's better. Sometimes it's directional. Let me know, Amrit.
Yeah, we can hear you, Victor.
Okay, all right. Um, so I want to share a little bit about what I've been doing since 2008. I'm not sure if you guys probably have seen Satish Telim. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing his name right because I don't talk to him audibly usually, and so I've never heard him state his name. But he's with RubyLearning.org, and I know he does Go um, organization stuff now as well. So I met up with him in 2008 and took his Ruby learning course and started mentoring that same couple months later for him. So I've been doing that since 2008. And I take on independent students as well, and I also mentor and help maintain exorcism.io. Let me turn on my camera if I can figure out how to do that. Nope, no idea. Sorry. Um, sorry about that. I just don't use Zoom. Seems to be very, very odd. Um, all right, so hopefully I can see you guys when you want to show me something or ask me something. In the meantime, I have this web session. I'm going to share it in chat, uh, and hopefully people can log in or show up there. Start my video. There you go. And thank you, host. I just sent a link, and people will have the ability to type in the terminal from the web address. So as we go along, somebody can go ahead and write code if they'd like to. All right, so let's get started. This is just an introduction to Minitest because I wasn't sure what kind of audience we were going to have, and so I want to talk about testing. Some companies I've consulted with, they've even gone straight out and told me, we don't believe in testing. It slows people down and it doesn't do what we think it should do. And of course, I tell them that no, unfortunately, you guys do believe in testing. I suspect that you guys test your applications and don't just ship them out the door. So I would guess that you guys are manually testing. Oh, yeah, we test everything. Well, that's kind of the opposite of what you just told me. So would it save time if you were able to automatically test or test the same things consistently and not forget, oh, I was supposed to try, what if somebody gives me a 0? Or what if somebody passes in, Bobby drop tables, right, as a name? What does that do? Does it do what I expect it to do? So everyone tests. Um, just sometimes we have automated ways to do that. Sometimes we don't test first, sometimes we spike. We can record the spike and use that for example usage documentation, and I'll show a little bit of that in the terminal here. So I want to open up a Vim server, which means I got to close my Vim server. Save that. And all right. And we're going to test a little bit here in IRB, and I hope everyone's familiar with IRB. So we're just going to open this up and display it. Can you all see that on the web? Did you guys get the chat? You guys can chat in the chat. I can see you in the chat for sure. So I have a Vim session open. I'm not going to use the Vim session exactly right now. Maybe I will in a minute. I probably will in a minute. But I'm going to open up an IRB session. And I'm going to use IRB to test an idea out. If I say hello, what would I expect to get? Maybe I want to get hello world. There you go. All right, so someone go ahead and define a hello method for me. And that hello method should return the string hello world. Oops, somebody clicked on the other side. Go ahead and do it right in IRB. All right, so as expected, all right, so this is good. We now have some code that we can use. Now I'll go over to the editor over here and I'll just edit our hello.rb file. And if we were to use IRB for testing, on the other side here, I'm going to pop over there. Somebody type hello and see if it does what we want it to do. Go ahead and type in user method. Good. All right. That's awesome. All right. So we have our expectation. I'm going to do, we expect to be able to go hello, and we would expect to get hello, all lowercase. All right. So let's do it with the hello and comma and world so that, you know, let's eat grandma is very much changed if we don't have a comma in the right place, right? So we want to say hello world also correctly. And I'm going to split this window and I'm going to use a tool called RubyDocTest. This is kind of like Python's doc test. And it's going to tell us if our expectation is correct. And we get an undefined local variable or method hello for main object, which is good. My test can fail, right? That's what I wanted to test. And I'm going to define it exactly as we did here. Puts hello, oops, hello world, and I'm going to use double quotes here. Usually I would use single quotes, but that's fine. So we're going to test this again, and I'm going to test this automatically. RubyDocTest hello.rb. Every time I save the file, the test will run. All right, so this test says that we're getting nil back. We expected hello world, but we got nil back. So what's wrong with the test? There we go. On my system, if you're in there and you want to update the file, you can do space W and that will update it. And now we have our test results, right? This is really fast. We can replace that with a capital H. We can update our file. Sorry. Oops. Hold on a second. I got the keyboard. So I'm going to do R capital H to replace it. And I'm going to find the W and do R capital W. And I'm going to update again. And what are we missing? We're missing the exclamation mark now and the comma, right? So yeah, somebody's asking me, yep, somebody's asking me if I was testing, I would have gotten confused for a while because, right, because when we start out, we're not necessarily sure exactly what we want. And so somebody went up to the top here and they're like, oh, well, let's just change the test. You know, obviously the test is wrong. Well, if we've confirmed that this is exactly what we want, then somebody clicked on the other side, then we know this is what we'd like to get. And so it's our code that needs changing. So we're going to go ahead and change the comma and the exclamation mark. And now it should pass, right? We're getting our default test to pass. RubyDocTest here, I can just put in, I can greet the world and as my test title, and now my test title won't be default test anymore. If I do this right, I missed a, it's not Ruby doc test as a title, it's doc test colon, that's what it's looking for, and now I have a new title. So this works really well because when I generate documentation now, my method automatically gets a usage example as well, right? So that's pretty cool. If I were to now do the same thing, if I were to load hello.rb, let's say that I didn't write the test up there. Let's say that I did it here and I just wanted to document what it does. I can copy and paste that into a comment, and I also again have an example usage for my method, right? So it's a real fast way to, you're going to be in the console, you're going to say, okay, if I do this, what happens? Is it what I expect to happen? Once it's what you expect to happen, you can use that as documentation. We would do indentation over here, and we'd have it lay out as code example inside of probably a comment block to make it look nice, and use yard or rdoc. A superset of rdoc is yard. And we have an easy, fast way to test something, okay? Yes, okay, so there is something that I didn't cover here, and I'm going to split this window here, and to get Ruby doc test, if you want to play with it, gem install Ruby doc test, and there you go, right? The result was nil. Okay, so if you're a Rails programmer, most of the time you're not doing puts, right? You're letting the framework render your result. The same is for like what we want to do when we're writing Ruby code. I say that like Rails isn't Ruby, right? But there's a lot of magic stuff that happens in Rails that we don't have to worry about. Methods shouldn't output things unless they're named put or print. That tells us that it's going to output something. In fact, the important thing about that is that it does output it. It's not so important as to what it's outputting, just that it does output to the right place. So we want it to output to $, what is it, $, something. Can't think of it right now, but basically it's to standard out. And then other things you might want to put to standard error, right? So if I do print error method, then I would say print that out to standard out. But every time I only get a nil, that means that it's not nice to test. I want to test a method and make sure that it gives me nil back every single time for anything. I can do that, but doesn't have much value. In this case, I want to be able to test that it actually says hello world and not that it returns nil. So there are ways to do that. You can capture standard out. We have the variables that represent that file, and of course we know that we can read files, and in Linux everything's a file anyway, so we capture that output and we can compare it. We would do that in a proc, probably, right? Maybe a lambda, which is a specialized proc, so still the answer is probably a proc. And then we can compare the output.
9 hours exactly.
Sorry. Yeah, actually, that's not even a true statement. RSpec and Minitest can be used for testing any Ruby programs, including Rails. RSpec and Minitest can be used for testing any programs, right? It's not even limited to Ruby. So it's going to be easier, probably. You have to know more if you're going to use Ruby to test other languages. You have to know more than what you probably know to be a Rails developer. But yeah, they're testing frameworks. When you're testing Rails, a lot of times you're testing interactions with a database or things like that. So you're not necessarily even testing Ruby at that point. You're testing another language. You're testing something that derives from SQL. So in a way, you kind of overreach that Ruby barrier when you're testing. So, all right, let's look and see what I have for the next. Okay, so this is this slide. If you go and look at the slide now, this is what I was talking about. We don't necessarily need a big formal framework, especially if we're just spiking, right? Testing can be hard. Testing can be hard when we make mistakes like use puts, which always returns nil. We want to leave the option of where to output things to the user when they need to output it. All right, so why do we need a testing framework? We could write our own. We could have wrote things like assert or refute, like I have done here. And that probably would be fine. And this is actually something that I suggest doing when you're learning a language. Write assertions. You want to go ahead and say, if I do this, this is what I get. It gives you practice on how does the language deal with output? How does it deal with inputs? How do you test for that? And when you get ready to go to a formal framework, then all those decisions that you had to make, making your little framework for testing, your assertions, you start to see what decisions they made for you because you've made some of those decisions yourself. Go ahead, Privish. You were waving, or maybe not.
Oh, no, I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
That's okay. That's all right. I was smiling. I'm like, okay, somebody's alive. So at the end of the day, do we really want to maintain a test suite on top of our application? No, we've got smart people that said, hey, I want to specialize in frameworks, or at least I want to do that as a secondary thing. And so they give us frameworks. It's awesome. We don't have to worry about it. But that means that we have to kind of concede to their biases, right? To what they decide they want to test for. So we're not going to write a test framework in this talk. And because I know this is an hour-long talk, I'm going to skip doing some of that, right? That I would do normally for this. So here's our little puts assert thing that we wrote. We're using the methods that we wrote up here. And we would get the true or the false, and we would see that in the terminal. But once you start doing it in the terminal, then you've got to visually verify that, yes, I see that. True, lowercase, true, capitalized as a class, right? Yeah, there you go. And true, lowercase, gives you the true as well. So as you're running through your manual search and it's putting things out to the screen at like true and false, then you realize that, hey, I want to have some kind of message of what exactly did I just evaluate, and those are the things that you want to write into your own custom test framework. So Minitest is a popular testing framework. It's not as popular, I don't think, with the Rails group as RSpec, but there's so much more to Ruby than just Rails. There's a lot of, like, it's been around since 93. I've been using it somewhat since 95. Started using it more around 97, 98 when it started getting a little more mature. And then, of course, Rails came out with their Make a Blog in 15 Minutes video, which got everybody excited about it. And then from then on, you'd really hear about it from a web development focus rather than what it was initially used for, which was where you'd use Perl, right? So systems administration, solving problems like that, glue for your systems. And that's how I used it. I would use it to administer, I'm on, using Linux, but I'd use it to administer Windows network systems and my Linux systems and my Unix systems. So it was really kind of a breath of fresh air. So a lot of things that are in Perl are available to Ruby even still, but Ruby was just more fun to work with. Plus it was new. We all like shiny things, right? So I believe that Minitest comes bundled with Ruby when you install it. I use RVM. Some people use RBE and V. And so my most of the time my experience is what RVM gives me, and I don't find myself having to do a gem install mini test. But if you wanted the latest version, you would do gem install mini test and the latest available packaged version, right? You can go download, clone the repository on GitHub with RVM/RVM, I think, and you can build it and you can have the greatest bleeding edge version that you want. But this is fine. We don't want to do that for production systems anyway, but we definitely want to do that when we're learning or if we're trying to submit a patch. So the assertions that we do have is a list of these things. And if we look on my system, I'm going to go back to my system here, and I'm going to run the Minitest assertions program. I have the .rb on it to show that, yeah, this is something that I wrote. And I'm also going to zoom this. Hopefully that works well in the browser. These are the ones that are applicable to the version of Minitest specifically that I have on my system, because it queries, it introspects the Minitest itself and pulls out the assertions that are available for me. So if I'm using an older version and maybe must be within Delta doesn't exist, it wouldn't show. It tells me exactly what's there. You have very similar things like this in RSpec as well, obviously, because it's a testing framework. What we don't have are things like this in RubyDocTest, because RubyDocTest is just basically an IRB session that works like IRB does for the most part. So we don't have assertions. We have, if you did this in IRB, this is what you'd expect to have. If you did it in Rails console, this is what you would expect to have. And it's just a confirmation of that. So I use RubyDocTest when I spike. I use RubyDocTest when I want to show an example things. It does conflict with seeing is believing. If anybody uses that gem, just know that. And it's because of the syntax, obviously. But I don't know. Anybody have any guesses on what assert equals does for the test style and how you might use that? You can type that in the chat on Zoom. Anybody know what assert does without any other word? So assert and assert equals, the two that we're looking at right now. Figured I'd give people time to suppose what that is. Assert it's true. Yep, that's good for asserts. And assert equal, actually all the asserts technically asserts that it's true. That's what the assert means. But assert on its own just means that you're getting something that's not nil or false. And assert equal asserts two objects are equal. That's true. All right, so that's the test style. We also have the probably maybe more familiar spec style wording, and that's these. So I don't use RSpec. I haven't used RSpec in years. When students come to me, I usually end up converting them to Minitest. The tests that they do give me, I just convert them over to Minitest. But these are very similar, right, to the RSpec ones. You guys can confirm that. Must be empty, must be close to, must be, would be the same as assert. Must be equal. Is it equal or must be? I don't see equals. Must be equal to or must? Yeah, must equal. I see it down there. It's just must be. The B's are moving it way down. Must equal, must output. That's the one assertion that would say, like, you know, that you'd be able to test puts with, and you would give it a block and then it would expect output. So it captures the standard out and or standard error and says, yeah, we definitely get output. So which ones do you guys prefer, the assert or the must be? You like the assert? You like the test unit style? Yep. I'm going to show you, I don't think I have a test unit version of the test here, but I'll show you what the run looks like. Obviously, that's right here. The file name's a convention for pattern matching, so I have Ruby test hello.rb, which I think I can run here. Assert hi, it's not equal to. Oh, yeah. So your refutes being not equal to, you just say you refute hi, and then what you would expect it not to equal, right? So whoever typed in the web browser there. Ruby, for RSpec, if I had an RSpec, I'd have to type the RSpec command. But for Minitest, it's just Ruby. I can do test. Let's see what my tests are. I'm going to run a tree real quick. I guess I have them in assets. So I'm going to do test results and not test results, hello test. Ruby assets, hello test. Why can't I run that? Cannot load hello RB. Because I didn't include. Okay, so these files are actually for the slides. So I need to include the lib or the bin, the lib, in order for it to load it. And because it's local here, I need to do that, I thought. All right, you guys see me struggle. Let me see, how do I do an includes in the terminal here? Load path. Is that an L or an I? I can't see very well. So I think that's an L for load path. Nope, it's got to be an I. Well, it's got to be a lowercase L or an uppercase I. And it's still saying I can't find that. So where's my hello.rb? Again, it's in assets. I'm just going to load it as it is. Require assets hello.rb and then run the, dang it. All right, sorry about that, guys. I ran through this the other day and I do not remember how I ran that test. Yeah.
The time is 9
Anyway,
hours.
the test is here.
15 minutes exactly.
And I can edit that. Assets hello test. And because I have a Vim server running, I just load it in there and then I can do it here. So I'm going to do hello test. Okay, so I can run that directly, and I cannot. No. All right. Require relatives. Duh. All right. No. Anyone? Anyone? Relative to this file. All right. Because of where I'm running this from, that should work, but yeah, I don't want to struggle with that anymore. So how do we run the test? Normally, I would just run the Ruby test and then /test hello.rb. That is going to require the helper file. Normally, you'd set that up as a helper file, and it would load your load paths and everything that you want it to be. The dots are somewhat, I think I've seen that with our spec, where you can get to ... or you can get custom reports where you have more of a report style saying, I'm testing greeting the world, or I'm testing the greeter class, and then underneath that you get a subset and a nice report. You can do the same thing here as well. This is the spec style. The things to notice about this is that if we were writing this first, we might not know all of the things that we would expect from our method, but we'd want to write at least the basic things down, kind of like what we did with the ruby.test, right? We had that IRB session, and this is the code we wish we had. We hope that it does this, and when it's done, it does exactly that, and then we know when we break it later. So it must greet the world. We expect hello must equal hello world. We expect that it won't be the same string every time, because we know a little bit about Ruby. And if it is the same thing every time, the same object ID, meaning the same exact object, there's something maybe wrong there. The syntax that with the underscore is the same as expect, but on line 14, you can see that I have an underscore there. It could be expect as well. There is no arguments given to it. It's accepting a block, and this is stating that I shouldn't have it I shouldn't have it using puts, and I shouldn't have it giving anything out to standard error or standard out. So there's no output here. It must be silent. And I'm using a proc to do that. And I also want it to never be empty. Like, it should give me something, right? So as we develop this, we might say that it accepts a name, because we don't always want to just greet the world. We might even say that we want to ask if someone's there. The pattern's there. Hello world with an exclamation mark is a greeting, and hello world with a question mark is asking if the world is there, right? So it's a real easy, simple pattern. We would just give it a punctuation at the end, and that would give us the modified behavior that we want. And we could test for that. Since later versions of Minitest, calling assertions on objects directly is deprecated, so they have the expect method with the, expression that you're going to give, and then you call your assertions on that. Yeah. We can test for output via standard error, standard out. That's the assert silent or must be silent, depending on the testing style that you like. Just also, if you do like the describe hello method, do it must greet the world, that doesn't mean that you're stuck with must equal. You could also use the assertions if you prefer the assertions and they make sense to you and your team. You can mix and match the spec describe with the assertion, right? It doesn't have to be this way. But if you're using the Minitest, I believe that you'd have to do a little bit of investigation on how to use the assertions, because it doesn't do the exact same thing. That describe and the string that we give could also be a class. If I had a greeting class, I'd use greeting maybe, but I can use any arbitrary thing there. It does create a class for you, which is why it gives us the scope, right? Time's getting really short, so I'm just gonna go through here and show you what that looks like as a unit test. I think that you can agree. It's not rocket science. Otherwise, we'd all be working for Elon Musk at this point. And the sample code that makes this work with no extravagances at all. And that's it. And of course, it passes all 4 tests. All right, anybody have any quick questions about the syntax? Require relative, I don't know why Hamlet that didn't work, but I know it worked before because I pasted exactly the result to the slide. It could be. Require relative, the RB is not required because in Ruby we accept, we do accept .rb extensions, but it also accepts C libraries, right, and DLLs. So that's why we usually leave those off the end. These are the kind of details that you use all the time and you don't think about it and go, oh, I don't have to put the RB there. But there's a reason more than, oh, I just don't have to put the RB there. It's no, so that it will accept other file types. So you can require the things that you need, even if they're not Ruby. No. So technically, even in RSpec, you don't need a separate gem to mock and stub because at the end of the day, it's just Ruby. Do you know how to make a mock object? It's just Ruby. It's just a Ruby object. So RSpec gives you those things. Minitest has the ability to mock and stub as well. It does. But you can do them yourself. So if you understand how to write a mock or a stub, you can do that. All right, so to learn more about Minitest, you can go to, I think it's minitest.org. I believe that's the case. And I don't have links there, so. Yep, minitest.org will take you to github.com. And actually, it takes you like test spec mock benchmark right there at the top of the README. And it's actually a pretty good introduction to run through. The nice thing about the stubs, they only okay, so so you can change the prompt, but RubyDoc won't know what that means. It's looking for that. I've made some contributions to the RubyDoc test gem, but you can't, like, you kind of want to limit that. The seeing is believing, the equal greater than, I believe, is what causes the problem. Maybe with that, but I use RubyDoc test, or I use IRB with the simple prompt all the time instead of using the original one, which I don't even know if I can disable it. No, can't. I don't know how to disable it, but maybe if I do IRB no RC file, suppress read, yeah. So it's IRB-F, then it won't take my IRB RC file and read that in. So you can get this and you can go 1 + 2. You still get the equal greater than. In order to change that, you'd have to change the prompt, which you can do in an IRB, in the IRB RC file.